And I think we're live. Hey Raiders, it's Mr. Swanson here, and I'm here today to create an audio guide for you for our class on Manifest Destiny. As you know, this is my week at Army National Guard drill. I'm at Fort Stewart. Hope it's not too cold because I slept outside last night. You are in class, room 1206, and today your topic of the day is Manifest Destiny. Now listen, I really regret not being with y'all this week. I've told you that. I love the conversations we have in class. I love the interactions. You can ask me questions. I can point out things on the screen that you're wondering about. I love especially seeing your faces light up with what I call the aha moment. You know, we're talking about something, it's new to you, we're working through it, and then your face lights up. It's like, aha, I got it. I call that the aha moment. I love seeing that in class, and obviously I'm not in class to see that with you today. But what I want to have for you is this audio guide. Now, I know I'm on video, but here's what I would recommend. Pull up the slides, open with Google Slides, pull up the slides for Manifest Destiny, and just listen what I'm saying as I walk you through the slides. Now, they are on the screen behind me, but it's not the best video. So look at the slides, look at your notes. These are your notes for the class period, and you can see that we are going to build the United States, the different, I like to call it puzzle pieces, the different puzzle pieces of the United States, and this is what we know as Manifest Destiny. So all that said, go ahead and switch to your slides, leave your audio in, audio guide on Manifest Destiny. Here we go. So again, this is a powerful painting that kind of describes Manifest Destiny. America is put at the center of the portrait as an angel. She's very angelic, and we see several different groups of people coming across the frontier as well. Before we get into that, let's go ahead and just nail the definition of Manifest Destiny. There you see it on the bottom of your screen there. If you move on to the next slide, write this down on your notes. The definition of Manifest Destiny is the belief in the 1800s that the United States was destined by God to expand across the entire continent from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. It is our right to do so. So the by God part is very important. Americans genuinely believe, the belief at this time was, we have the best way to live, the way we do the economy is right, the way we do religion is right, we are an evolved group of people, and unfortunately what that neglects is the groups of people they have to stomp on in order to move out west. And we're going to find that it is at great expense to the American Indian and the Plains Indians as the white man, and I use the word for the phrase white man to refer to Americans expanding out west. So, you know, the belief that God himself says we deserve to spread from sea to shining sea, from the Atlantic to the Pacific Ocean. This is a overarching philosophy that's really going to drive how we acquire land, why we acquire land. And I mean, hey, when you put a religious spin on it, God himself says it's our right to do this. Kind of hard to slow down, or kind of hard to convince someone otherwise. And if God is on our side, how are you going to convince me otherwise? So again, I don't know what you believe, your personal beliefs from a religious perspective, but this was the overarching belief at the time frame. So next slide here, I'm not going to talk about each of these, but you can see the various people groups that are depicted in this portrait. Mormons, Native Americans, farmers, exodusters, 49ers, cowboys, each of them having a reason to head out west, and you can spend some time on the explanations there. You can see it's not just any one people group, but a lot of people heading out west as the country stretches out west. Manifest Destiny. You're going to see this next map several times, and we have our country chunked into 7. One of the first slides was a puzzle. I want you to think of it as 7 puzzle pieces coming together. You probably all put a puzzle together at some time in your childhood, and I just want you to imagine this is the puzzle pieces of the United States coming together, and we're going to see this slide every single time we move on to a new puzzle piece. Just another representation, different colors. It's important to note the names of each of these puzzle pieces, because that is how I'm going to refer to them over the next few minutes as well. So first of all, the New Republic, what you see on the screen there is what you can summarize into that box. This is America as of the end of the American Revolution. The boundaries are to the east is the Atlantic Ocean. Originally, the original 13 colonies, the boundary was the Appalachian Mountains. But of course, it becomes the Atlantic Ocean. It becomes the Mississippi River after the Revolution. So the boundaries are the Atlantic Ocean to the east. Originally, it's the Appalachian Mountains, but then it becomes the Mississippi River, thanks to the Treaty of Paris of 1783. The British were supposed to leave this area, the light purple that you see on your screen. The British were supposed to leave this area, but we've already talked about that they didn't leave entirely. at this time, as we have this amount of land, you may think we're content, right? Are we satisfied with the amount of land we have? We're itching for more, right? Simply put, we're itching for more. Gimme, 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 more is going to become the attitude of America. So first chunk of land, we spent a lot of time talking about the United States in 1783 already. Won't belabor that point. I'll move on to the second chunk of land, the Louisiana Purchase. We, of course, have already had this conversation. It was sold by France in order to fund Napoleon's European wars. He needed cash. He didn't care about land in the New World. He would rather have had cash. So it's purchased by Thomas Jefferson under the treaty-making powers which were granted to the president in the Constitution. We talked about how Thomas Jefferson says he stretched the Constitution so far that it cracked. He was a strict interpreter of the Constitution, but once he was in the White House, he found that he kind of had to have a looser interpretation of the Constitution. Technically, he makes a treaty with France, which is essentially amounts to purchasing the territory. Price was $15 million, amounts to about 4 cents per acre. Adjust that for modern times at 74 cents per acre. Total chump change. Obviously, the real estate deal of a lifetime. Major takeaways that it doubles the size of the United States. Hopefully, you remember what we did in the room, where you were living on half of the room, you're totally cramped, and the desks were turned over on one side. Well, when I let you uncoil the desks, it doubled the size of the room, and that is referencing the doubling the size of the United States. It gets explored by Lewis and Clark, known as the Core Discovery. I had a conversation about them. We now have new boundaries. Our new boundaries are now from the Atlantic Ocean on the east, and it's a little bit of a wonky shape. Of course, it's not just a perfect line, but generally speaking, the Rocky Mountains in the west gives us a new boundary. And guess what? We're itching for more. Gimme, gimme, gimme. We're always looking for more. You think we might be satisfied? Wow, brand new piece of land, very inexpensive purchase. Really, all it does is gives us the desire to want more. The Core of Discovery even makes it all the way to the Pacific Ocean. And hey, remember, we are destined by God to stretch from sea to shining sea. Can't slow this roll. We will go from the Atlantic to the Pacific because God said we will. Here we have the map again. If you're walking through the slide, you see the map again. Let's go to territory number 3 is Florida. Of course, we live in Georgia, so I would imagine most of you have found a way into Florida, taken a drive to Florida in one way or another, spent some time on the beaches of Florida. You're probably familiar with Florida. Florida at this time was a Spanish territory. Okay, so Florida was first founded by the Spanish. St. Augustine, Florida, often called the oldest city in America, and also a lot of awesome Spanish architecture and old Spanish history down there. Well, our relationship with Florida at this time is that a lot of slaves were escaping into Florida. Since it was not a part of the United States, slaves who are in the American South can just, a lot of times we think about slaves escaping to the north. Well, these slaves are actually escaping to the south into Florida. So, of course, for Southern growers, that is a loss of their, the way they would see it, a loss of their property. That was not something that they were willing to tolerate. Interesting that the Indians in Florida, which a lot of the Indian tribe in Florida was the Seminoles, which is why you get the Florida State Seminoles as a college mascot. A lot of Indians were welcoming the slaves, and in fact, the Indians were kind of raiding into the American South and bringing African slaves into freedom with them. So we got this issue with Florida as it related to the slavery. Andrew Jackson, you may remember him, General Andrew Jackson, not president at this time. Andrew Jackson was given the mission to go right up to the border of Florida, the Florida-Georgia line, if you will, and stop the runaway slaves, right? Set up a boundary, stop slaves from escaping into Florida. Well, what we know about Andrew Jackson, we remember his personality and his brashness and boldness and swagger, if you will. Andrew Jackson doesn't go just to the border. He goes past the border, and he actually kind of starts taking control of Florida. He wasn't supposed to, okay? He was kind of breaking his orders, which as a military man, you don't really want to break your orders, but he was breaking his orders. He goes past the border, starts taking control of the of Florida, and at this point, you might expect the Spanish to have a problem with that. Yeah, you might expect the Spanish to say, hey, get out of my territory. We're going to fight over this. But in fact, it was basically the opposite. And the Spanish basically said, fine, we'll get out. It's fine, we'll get out. We don't really want to be here anyway. See, the Spanish were tired of colonizing in the New World. They were tired of the expense of maintaining Florida as a colony. So in a way, they were really just willing to get rid of it. And the way they get rid of it is through the Adams-Onis Treaty. Adams, that's going to reference John Quincy Adams, the Secretary of State, and Onis is the Spanish Secretary of State. And this treaty basically gives Florida to the United States. siege control of Florida to the United States, and kind of gives us a new boundary with New Spain, if you will. And this is how we acquire Florida. And that is that. All right, so that is number 3. Moving on to the pictures you see on the screen here, I'll say this real quick. The pictures you see on the screen here, this is the actual Adams-Onis Treaty, where they actually stamped their particular seal and signed their name. You see John Quincy Adams and Luis Onis. Me, nerd for primary sources. I just think this this artifact is awesome and awesome to look at. So, all right, that was 3. That is Florida. Moving on to number 4. Looking at your map there, you see the annexation of Texas. And boy, do I ever love this story. So the picture you see on your screen now says the Battle of the Alamo and the Mexican-American War. Let me tell you, if we were in Texas, this would be a major part of your class standards. But we're not in Texas, so it is not a major part of your Georgia class standards. But I'm going to tell you a little bit about it. It's a great story, and it does build into the whole. So the story of the Alamo and the Mexican-American War. First of all, we're going to have a revolt in Texas. What you see on your screen now says "Gone to Texas." A lot of people at this time would actually, Texas was kind of a land for people to go and get a new fresh start. So in the 18 teens, 1815 into the 1825-ish, a lot of Americans who had issues in America, could be debt, could be criminal charges, could be divorce, could be just something they wanted to escape, something bad in your past life. A lot of them were going to Texas. And so many people were going to Texas that they actually took to really just kind of disappearing in the night. No social media, no cell phones, no text messages. It's not like you're saying, hey, I'm packing up and moving to Texas. You wouldn't just tell anybody. You wouldn't necessarily communicate with somebody. A lot of people just put simply what you see on the screen there, GTT, gone to Texas. And if you saw a GTT on a door frame, you knew that your neighbors had packed up and gone to Texas. So all that to say, this was a thing at the time. A lot of people were GTT, gone to Texas. Now, Texas at the time is not a United States. It is a part of Mexico, and these people were essentially migrating into Mexican territory by going to Texas. Well, in 1829, okay, so I'm moving us into the 1829, there were actually more immigrants to this territory than there were Mexicans. They were not called Texans. Look at that word on your screen there. They're actually called Texians, kind of a combination of Texas and Mexican. They were called Texians. And there were so many of them that they outnumbered true ethnic Mexican nationals, and so many of them, in fact, that Mexico started to ban immigration. I mean, isn't that interesting, right? Mexican banned immigration into their territory, closed it to American immigration. Also, at this time, Mexico starts to order that these Texians pay taxes to Mexico. And that, hey, if we follow anything in the story of America, you know that taxes aren't something that people like to have to pay. Tax season is coming up. I was working on our personal taxes just the other day, so I can vouch for that. Well, many Texians start to realize that there are more of them than there are Mexicans. And as such, anytime you have a group of people kind of band together with numerical strength, they say, hey, there's more of us than there are of them. How about we don't pay taxes? How about we become our own territory? And they do. They revolt. So this gives us the Texas, a revolt in Texas. And the Mexican president at the time, his name is Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna. He's actually the government president, but he's also a military leader. So, he was both. He was a politician and a military man. He sends troops into Texas to try to put down this revolt. So from present-day Mexico, right, south of our current borders, into what is known as the Texas territory, he's going to try to put down this revolt. So the next screen you can see now is Sam Houston and the Revolution. So to this day, Texans, there's a kind of certain attitude that comes with being from Texas. The Texians weren't, were the originators of that attitude, if you will. And just like Texans are big and bold and brash, and what's the phrase? Everything's bigger in Texas. Well, these Texians also weren't really known for backing down from a clash. So they stand up with Santa Anna's army. They clash. And one of the leaders that kind of rises to the top is a man named Sam Houston. And yes, it is the namesake of the city of Houston. So you might think the Houston Astros baseball team, the Houston Texans, the football team, the Houston Rockets basketball team. I mean, that's in the city of Houston, and that is named after Sam Houston. Well, taking a page out of really almost the, Sons of Liberty and the rebels of 1776, Sam Houston and the Texians declare independence in 1836. and they sign what is known as the Texas Declaration of Independence. So not all that different from the story we've already come through. At this point, though, it is essentially fighting for what they hope will be a Republic of Texas, an independent country of Texas. I know today Texas is a state, right, and we consider them, they are part of our 50 states. But at this time, this was a Declaration of Independence to create a brand new country, not Mexico, not America, but the Republic of Texas. So let's see how it goes for them. So the Texians and their limited army, all right, I mean, they declared independence, but they do not have the bigger army. They do not have more money, and they retreat to what is known as an old Spanish mission known as the Alamo. Now, Spanish mission, basically, AKA a church. So their army is building inside of this fortified structure. Now, the Alamo, I say that, it might come to mind for some of you. You might know what it looks like, and I am going to show you a couple pictures, or you can look at a couple pictures along the way here. Very iconic structure, very famous, architecture, and it still stands to this day. You can go and visit a portion of it. Now, the whole compound, some of it is turned into rubble or been built up around, but the main portion, that picture, just go ahead and go to the picture where it's white and it looks like that, that iconic shape. That is the Alamo. That is the Alamo that we're talking about here. So briefly, the story, again, if this was a Texas classroom, you'd have a long time to learn about this story, but I'll just give you the brief version. For 12 days, they're surrounded by the Mexican army, the much stronger Mexican army of about 6,000 people. Inside this compound, and it's more than just that white structure, there was a whole courtyard and there were several other barracks buildings and such. But generally speaking, it was not that large of a compound. There's 183 Texians inside the Alamo, and for 12 days they hold off 6,000 Mexicans, right? Very limited weapons, very few cannons, very limited gun. Oh, I hope they didn't die. It says it reconnected, and I hope that it did. I'm going to carry on. I hope that it reconnected. Long story short, on the 13th day, which is March 6, 1836, the Mexicans swarm the Alamo. 183 Texians are killed. And from this battle, we get the very famous cry, "Remember the Alamo." It becomes a very famous battle cry. It's going to motivate future fighters, and it is going to be something that continues. It kind of brings more people to the cause and helps more people get involved with the fight for the Republic of Texas. A couple famous characters that come out of that, and maybe you see on your screen now, is Jim Bowie. Jim Bowie is known for, if you'll advance the picture, you see that lady holding that, looks like a small sword. That's known as a Bowie knife. Jim Bowie is credited with inventing, or at least designing, what is known as the Bowie knife. Very large knife, sometimes nicknamed an alligator's toothpick. And you can see that it is kind of a formidable weapon. And he's credited with designing it or inventing it, and certainly credited with carrying it. Jim Bowie is a classic example of someone who comes to Texas kind of for negative reasons. He was trying to escape divorce and debt and just kind of a bad past life in America, and really becomes one of the founders of the Texian army. He's at the Alamo, but he's ill. He's fallen ill. So the picture you see on your screen there, he's in his bed. He's literally on his sick bed. And as the story goes, when the Mexicans invaded the Alamo and stormed into his hospice room, he was ready with 2 pistols and his knife. And he killed the first 2 that came through the door, and then he stabbed a couple more before he is killed by the Mexicans that come into the room. That's Jim Bowie. This is Davy Crockett. Davy Crockett's a very large legend, kind of a tall tale figure, really, known as King of the Wild Frontier. So on the left-hand side, you see the Disney version of Davy Crockett. It is an older Disney movie, and maybe the song comes to mind, Davy Crockett, King of the Wild Frontier. Well, picture on the right-hand side is real Davy Crockett. And tell you a little bit more about the truth of Davy Crockett. A history class, we like learning the truth, not just the myth. So Davy Crockett was actually a former congressman from the state of Tennessee, represented Tennessee and Washington, D.C. He is known for having stood up against the Indian Removal Act, which we just talked about as it pertained to Andrew Jackson, moving Indians from Georgia in the southeast into the Oklahoma territories. So Davy Crockett says, hey, this is not right, Mr. President. You should not move these people off their lands. So in a way, he's kind of a friend of the Native American because he stood up against the Indian Removal Act. Now, unfortunately, his voice alone was not enough to enact any change, any lasting change. And in fact, he was not reelected because of his opposition to the Indian Removal Act. He lost reelection. And in his last speech to Congress, from the floor of Congress, he says, You all may go to hell, for I am going to Texas. And he was one of those GTT, gone to Texas, where he continues his story. He finds himself at the Alamo, and he is known to have died defending the Alamo. A lot of those who died at the Alamo are known as Alamo defenders. And the Alamo actually has a great website, a great social media presence. It is a living museum, and they're very committed to stewarding the truth of the battle. And I would encourage you to kind of check that out via social media or a website. I can post the website for the Alamo. David Crockett, King of the Wild Frontier. And then one of my favorite stories, one of my favorite characters from the Alamo is Lieutenant Colonel William Travis. Colonel Travis was in command at the Alamo. He actually kind of shared leadership with Jim Bowie, but when Bowie became sick, he becomes the main leader. William Travis does something super powerful, super powerful. He does two things super powerful. One is he writes a letter out from the Alamo, and he sends it out all across Texas. And in his letter, he kind of gives a real honest assessment of the situation. He says things are not looking good. Things are, things look pretty dire. We are surrounded. We need reinforcements. People of Texas, please come to us with reinforcements. And unfortunately, reinforcements never arrive in time, but his letter was widely viewed and was very inspirational to the cause. At the end of his letter, he signs it, victory or death, right? Like, what a sign up. When I write a letter, I might say sincerely or very respectfully, which is not very cool. He says victory or death. And I love that because he knew it was going to be one of two things. We're either going to win this thing or we're going to die trying, victory or death. Pretty powerful. That actually kind of carries roots from George Washington's crossing of the Delaware River, where his challenge and password was victory or death. So a lot of great warriors across U.S. history have done some big things with a lot on the line, and the attitude of victory or death. Pretty powerful, pretty powerful. Another thing he does, so the first thing was the letter. Second thing he does is on the night before the climactic battle, okay, day 12 going into day 13, he gathers everybody inside the courtyard of the Alamo. And realistically speaking, they know that tomorrow is going to be the big day. Tomorrow is going to be the battle of battles, right? We're low on ammunition. They've got a lot. There's a lot of Mexicans outside the fort. And they're going to storm the gates tomorrow. He gathers everyone together. He praises them for their bravery, their courage, and he says, I know you're all here by choice. Draws a line in the sand. Takes a sword out, draws a line in the sand, and he says, any man who will stand with us through tomorrow, step across the line. And 183 out of 184 step across that line. One man, I don't know his name, one man says, I'm going to try to escape under the cover of darkness. I don't want to be here tomorrow when the suicide mission comes. And really, a lot of what we know from the Alamo comes from that individual who escaped under the cover of darkness. But I think the real heroics are the 183 who stayed, stepped across the line and said, we choose to be here. So a lot of times that's a phrase you'll hear in the world to this day. Draw a line in the sand. It means which side are you on? Are you for us? Are you against us? Are you with us? Or are you leaving? Maybe a coach says that. Maybe your pastor says that. Draw a line in the sand. And that comes from William Travis, the picture you see on your screen, drawing a line in the sand. Alamo's been represented in several movies. John Wayne on the right, a little bit more recent. I think that movie comes from 2004 with Dennis Quaid, Billy Bob Thornton, The Alamo. Wonderful story. So the Alamo is not the end of the fight for Texas. Remember, the Alamo actually rallies a lot more Texians to the cause. They go on and fight another battle, the Battle of San Jacinto. At San Jacinto, Sam Houston wins the battle. Sam Houston leads the Texian army to victory over Santa Anna. Santa Anna is actually captured, and a lot of people wanted to kill him. Okay, so if you look at the picture here, this is Sam Houston's laying down. He's injured. Santa Anna is in the blue top, white pants, and I really like to look at the people around them, right? Look at the guy that's kind of holding his friends back. Look at a couple of them, like they look like they're willing to go scrap. A lot of people wanted to kill Santa Anna, right? He killed people at the Alamo, so we should kill him right now. But Sam Houston actually negotiates for Santa Anna to just leave. He says, hey, I'll let you leave. I'll let you leave alive. Just leave. So Santa Anna and his army leave, and that essentially leads to what becomes known as the Lone Star Republic. Texas is a sovereign nation for 10 years, 1836 to 1845. And in 1845, Texas becomes a U.S. state. So starts as its independent republic, but becomes the United States in 1845. It is the 28th state, and it is annexed to the United States as a slave state. So we're always balancing free and slave. You might remember the Missouri Compromise. It is south of that line. So being a southern state, it was annexed to the United States as a slave state. That is the story of Texas. All right, moving on to number 5, the Oregon country or Oregon territory. Now, if you look at that, you can know that that's modern day Oregon and Washington state. At the time, it is simply known as the Oregon territory. The word Washington is going to come later. June of 1846, Britain and the United States signed the Treaty of Oregon, establishing the 49th parallel as the international boundary between the United States and what is present-day Canada. So looking at the map there, this is our present boundary to this day. It's known as the 49th parallel to line of latitude. I know we've talked 3630. Well, this is the 49th parallel, and it's supposed to kind of give a boundary line between British claims and American claims, although there is still a lot of dispute related to that. President James K. Polk, we're not going to talk about him a lot. He's our 11th president, but one thing he's notable for is his attitude of 54-40 or fight. Now remember, I just said the 49th parallel is what was agreed upon. North of that would be 54-40. If you go back to this map, this would give America kind of a funnier shape, right? We don't have the 54-40 line today. We have the 49th. But if we settled for, or rather if James K. Polk actually got the 54-40 line, America would be shaped a little bit more awkward today. Wouldn't have that seamless border across with Canada like we have on the map right now. Well, what's funny about this is his whole presidential motto. He says 54-40 or fight, right? Or else we're going to go to war. What's kind of funny about that is that he settles for the 49th parallel. He says 54-40 or fight. We're going to go to war if we don't get 54-40. But just kind of like classic politicians, he says one thing and then he settles for another. He settles for the 49th parallel, no war. So it's almost like you campaigned on this, but then you actually didn't follow through with it. Have we ever seen that with politicians today? No, of course not. But this gives us our present northern boundary. It also gives us, think about this, it also gives us access to the Pacific Ocean. So reasonably, we have arrived at the Pacific Ocean, have we not? Isn't manifest destiny the belief that we're going to spread from sea to shining sea? We're there. So what? So more, right? We're there, but we want more. We have reached the Pacific Ocean, but now what? Well, we won't settle there, right? We still want more. Polk, the 11th president, he is an expansionist. His attitude is going to be to expand. He's determined to satisfy manifest destiny by gaining more and more land. And as a Southerner and someone who believes in slavery, he wants more land to have more slave territory. Let's keep expanding on the belief that more land will give us more territory in which to farm crops. And of course, to farm crops, we need slaves. So he's an expansionist for the purpose of slavery. He does bring us to Oregon territory. Let's see what else James K. Polk brings to us as well. So after after Texas was annexed, Mexico still had certain territory that is in the present-day United States, New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, Nevada. So let's talk about how we gained that. That's going to be called the Mexican Cession. So after Texas was annexed, Mexico still considered, there were still a lot of boundary issues and border issues. The borders were so fuzzy that, when borders are fuzzy, we're bound to have conflict, and that's exactly what happens. This is called the Mexican-American War. So the disputed territory in Texas. The U.S. troops occupy land in South Texas, which is north of the Rio Grande River, present-day border. The Mexican troops cross the Rio Grande, that's coming from the south to the north into present-day Texas. And what happens here is kind of he said, she said, who shot John, right? We don't exactly know what happens. What happens is that American troops are fired upon by the Mexican troops. And the United States says we were in U.S. territory. We were on U.S. soil. What that means is that the Mexicans have shed American blood on American soil. And think about it. Are we able to accept, hello lights, are we able to accept American blood being shed on American soil? No, right? You have to do something about it. Can you just sit there and take a punch and do nothing about it? Well, I hope you won't fight in my classroom. But from a government perspective, if American blood is shed on American soil, the government wants to retaliate about it. The problem is, the Mexican says we were on our own land, right? We shot at you because you were in our land. We have a dispute here. I love the Spider-Man meme. It's like, you're on my land. No, you're on my land, right? So I like telling history through memes. Kind of what happens there. Well, enter Congressman Abraham Lincoln. Congressman Abraham Lincoln. This is actually the youngest picture of Abraham Lincoln, the first known picture of him to exist. Not President Abraham Lincoln, but Congressman Abraham Lincoln. Congressman Abraham Lincoln actually opposes the Mexican-American War. At a time, so goes, should we go to war? The vote goes to Congress. And many people were in favor of going to war. They shot at us. We need to go to war to get our territory back. Congressman Abraham Lincoln says, nope o'clock. And that was a very, very unpopular opinion. Okay, remember, we just walked through the War of 1812. And when the Federalists opposed the War of 1812, they were seen as unpatriotic. A lot of people were did not like people who voted no for war. And in fact, Abraham Lincoln says, this is going to be the political death of me. This is the end of my political career because I took a stand against going to war. Abraham Lincoln saw what James Polk was up to. Abraham Lincoln saw that he was trying to grab more land for the purpose of expanding slavery. And this is kind of an early opportunity for Abraham Lincoln to say no to expanding the institution of slavery. Of course, we know it is not the end of him. He will go on. His political career is not over, and he will go on to be president. We'll talk much more about that later. Mexican-American War, a little bit more. So U.S. forces essentially capture what is present-day New Mexico, some of California, a portion of northwest Mexico. It's a rather short war, only lasts 20 months. In the grand scheme of things, it's a pretty short war. Victory helps the United States essentially reach the goal of Manifest Destiny. A lot of future Civil War officers get a lot of experience in the Mexican-American War. So younger soldiers, they're lieutenants, they're captains. They'll later go on to be leaders in either the Union or the Confederate Army. And they get a lot of early experience in the Mexican-American War, about 10 years before the country will be in our Civil War. So a lot of our future Civil War generals that we're about to talk about, they get a lot of experience right here in the Mexican-American War. And of course, at the time, they all fought on the same side. They fought in the United States Army. But in the Civil War, a lot of them are going to oppose each other, some being from the north, some being from the south. Well, in the end, here's what happens. Mexico agrees to accept the Rio Grande River as the northern border of Texas, which is what the Americans really already thought it was. Mexico recognizes that Texas is a part of the United States, and then Mexico cedes, okay, fancy word for gives up. Mexico gives up a large stretch of land between Texas and the Pacific Ocean, and this is why it is known as the Mexican Cession. They ceded this land to the United States, the Mexican Cession. So a little bit more about James K. Polk. Even though we gained this land, right, we did acquire this land through the war. After the fact, a lot of people saw that this was an unnecessary war to go to. Obviously, people died. Some Americans died. Some husbands and brothers and sons didn't come home. And a lot of people saw that it was an unnecessary and unconstitutional war. So Congress formally censures the president, but censure is not impeached. Censure is not removed. He's not kicked out of office. It's really just a slap on the wrist. So James K. Polk is censured by Congress. That effort is kind of led by Abraham Lincoln, right? Remember, he voted against the war in the first place. But guess what? The treaty was still signed and the land was still gained. So bad, Mr. President, you shouldn't have started the war, but the treaty was still signed, the land was still gained, and essentially we gained New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, Nevada, and part of California by force. We fought a war over it and we gained it through a war. The Mexican Cession, you see it on your screen there. You see what we gained from it. All right, moving on to number 7, the last one, and this is the Gadsden Purchase. Gadsden Purchase is the only portion actually purchased, other than the Louisiana Purchase, the only other sliver of land purchased. It is a tiny, tiny little chunk of southern Arizona and New Mexico. We purchased it for $15 million. Remember, the whole Louisiana Purchase was purchased for $15 million. Well, this sliver of land is also purchased for $15 million. Here's why. We needed it to build a railroad that does not go through the Rocky Mountains. So look at the map here. We haven't talked about the Transcontinental Railroad yet, but we're about to. If we wanted to build a railroad over the mountains, you got to blast through rock, you got to go up, then you got to go down. It'd be really hard to build a railroad over the mountains. But if we could get this sliver of land that at the time belonged to Mexico, the area basically of Tucson, Arizona, we could build a railroad that goes just south of the Rocky Mountains. And that is the reason for purchasing the Gadsden Purchase. Here's a map of the future Transcontinental Railroad, and I'm on warp speed now. Go through those last couple of slides, and you can see a couple memes here. So guess what? Manifest Destiny, we've reached the Pacific Ocean. Now what? We still want more, right? Why? Money. The belief was that we could go from sea to shining sea, which is part of God Bless America, a song that we still sing to this day. America the beautiful, from sea to shining sea. That's where that attitude comes from. But the real reason was money, right? We wanted more land for more money, but guess what? With more money comes more problems. Pay attention to the fire slide. This is a big takeaway. This is the big takeaway of Manifest Destiny. A slow developing process, but with a long lasting legacy. And just a couple of memes kind of to round it out. Give yourself a chuckle on that. This is the end of my audio guide for Manifest Destiny. Hope you had a good listen. And missing you, just know that I'm missing you. And I look forward to seeing you in class again. Study for your test. Have a great test on Wednesday. Mr. Swanson for Manifest Destiny. I'm out.